Well, hello. Welcome in. This is a bit of an unscripted video, just kind of putting my thoughts out there on something I've noticed and I wanted to, I guess, kind of address a little bit. Now, something I've noticed recently, and something you may have noticed as well, or maybe not, is there are a lot more 40K games coming out recently than I think there have been in, quote unquote, video game history. Now, it's not to say that there were no 40K games that came out before this, obviously, but in recent years we've been getting a lot of 40K. We've been getting a lot of 40K love, and the subject and the quality of these games has been on my mind a lot, especially as over the past 2 or 3 weeks I've been streaming the Space Marine games and playing like Rogue Trader by Owlcat in my personal time. And it's just kind of been sitting there as I kind of am more immersing myself into these contents. Now, what's been going on is over the past 4 or 5 years, as far as video games are concerned, and more so over like the past 10 years in other mediums, Games Workshop has been licensing out 40K a lot more than they used to. Really, obviously, trying to break out away from the tabletop strategy war game and into other common entertainment marketplaces. They're having comic books rolled out. They're putting out more and more like written books. They've got the Amazon show in the works, maybe with Henry Cavill, and that's in addition to just the glut of 40K video games that we've been getting a lot recently. And my personal interpretation of that is Games Workshop is seeing the amount of industry and business that's out there as far as getting away from simply doing war games. They're seeing all the business, all the money they've been missing out on, and they're going like, hey, we want to get in on this. It kind of seems to me like they're trying to franchise, trying to turn 40K into their own personal Star Wars, which is an understandable thing, and I think honestly probably a decent candidate for that. Now, the way they've been doing this is honestly probably the way I would do it, and I think the way most people who aren't, business masters and geniuses in this sort of field would do it, where you're taking your great high-value IP and you're licensing out production rights and creative rights to all these, double A, single A, indie kind of studios. Well, not really indie, but, double A and single A studios to make your video games. And they're doing the same thing with like their with the comic books they've been putting out, with the more traditional board games they've been getting out there. And as far as like Amazon, like that's their AAA license that they're giving out there, is with letting Amazon make a show, and that's obviously highly beneficial to both parties. So let's talk a little bit, I guess, about the history before I get into more in-depth as the modern stuff and what's going on there. So as far as like the history of 40K in gaming, 40K has been having video games basically as long as video games have existed. It's as a setting, it was coming out around the same time video games were getting big, but it has a lot of content that came out back in the day. Even 90s, early 2000s, 2010s, there were 40K games. We have the original, what's it called, Deathwing? The original, Tyranids on a spaceship game, and it was kind of it was basically a dungeon crawler type game. And then even going beyond that, you've got Chaos Gate, Rights of War. These are strategy based games, and what you're seeing a lot, especially back in the 90s, is the 40K games that came out were more so just digital interpretations of the tabletop game. And you see that even in like Warhammer Fantasy games that came out around the same time. Now, around the 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, they started trying to break more so into the market that was there, breaking away from the traditional tabletop franchise and, getting into what was popular and just kind of applying a skin of 40K paint to it. And the big well-known thing there is Fire Warrior. Now, if you know anything about Fire Warrior, you know it's not a very good game. It's not very pleasant to play. It's overall unoptimized. And I think that was a case of, you know, Games Workshop doing back then kind of what they're doing now, but with a less refined stance. You know, they were like, okay, well, who makes video games? Oh, these guys make video games. Okay, well, here, you make a 40K video game, right? And it'll be great. And then it wasn't great, and I think that made them shy for, you know, quite a long time. I don't think they put out like another 40K video game after that, at least not a first-person shooter, for years. And then, of course, you have Gladius, you have the Dawn of War games around the same time. Those are very popular, but again, what you're seeing is 40K games that are popular, that are well-regarded, are often just digitized versions of the traditional tabletop war game. And then, as we move on, you know, they're still trying to break in, so they had the Deathwing remake, which was, I mean, buggy as all hell, but I've played it with a friend, and when the game was working properly, it was very fun. You have the first Space Marine game back in 2011. That, again, another great game, popular game. I really loved it. You wouldn't necessarily be able to tell by my streams. Shout out to the stream channel. Click the link in the description. But you wouldn't be able to tell by the streams because it's incredibly frustrating. But it's you know, Space Marine is a very good game. It's made by Relic, published by Sega. You know, they're getting what they paid for. And for a while, Space Marine and Deathwing were like the more accessible 40K games that were out there. You know, something that your average gamer who doesn't have the high level autism for war games would be playing. And so now we come to kind of the quote-unquote modern age. You know, in the 2020s, Games Workshop has been putting out relatively a lot of 40K games, like high frequency, just 40K, 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 40K. And it is working. It's getting 40K into the mainstream, and that's a double-edged sword, but, you know, we're not here for necessarily culture war, normies, gaslight, girl boss, gatekeep type bullshit. I'm just here to talk about this particular subject. And so, what are the games that came out recently? Well, you know, some of them you may have heard of, and some of them you might not have. You know, we got big names in there. We got powerhouses like Darktide, Space Marine 2, and Bolt Gun. You know, Bolt Gun was they're trying to get onto the boomer shooter train. They could have, but, you know, generally kind of hindered by like poor boss designs. Like myself personally, I'd say Bolt Gun is like a 6 out of 10. It's functional, it's really fun to play, but the boss rush type nature of it hampers, you know, personal enjoyment of the game. I feel like I can't give it a higher score because of that. Hello, Future Nickel from the emergency editing bay here. One of the games I also neglected to mention that's recent history Warhammer 40K is 40K Necromunda, which is basically Games Workshop's attempt at, rather than making Doom 1997 or whatever the fuck in 40K, they were trying to make Doom 2016 in 40K. And it was a fun game, but again, just kind of shallow, very mid. You know, I'd say it's like a high 5 out of 10, like a 5.7, 5.8 type game. Not the greatest thing, but it's fun. You know, you get your money's worth. It's not bad by any means. It's not a waste of money. But again, that game also didn't get too much attention, kind of fell into obscurity. That's all I'm really here for, so I'll let you guys get back to future unscripted Nickel rather than, or past unscripted Nickel rather than future unscripted Nickel. Bye. Darktide. Darktide was a huge piece of shit. Okay, that's being overly harsh. Let me walk that back. Darktide was very disappointing, and that's done in large part because that's coming off of Vermintide 2. It's made by the same studio, and so when they clearly took a few steps back in their production of Darktide, when Darktide wasn't equal to or greater than the current state of Vermintide 2, people felt disappointed, they felt betrayed, they felt, a little robbed, what have you. And it was kind of like, well, this sucks. This isn't really what we wanted. This isn't really what we sold. I have a video on Darktide. I wasn't particularly kind to it. They've made adjustments. They've made changes. And that seems to be kind of Fat Shark's modus operandi. Is, we're going to put out a I don't want to call it a broken game, but we're going to put out a game that's, maybe not the best, and we'll just kind of fix it up as it goes. And then you've got the real big popular one that came out recently. Everyone's loving it, Space Marine 2. Personally, Space Marine 2, it's a fun game. I like the feel of it and everything like that. But it's kind of like Darktide, where mechanically it's got a lot of stuff I don't like. Boss fights in Space Marine 2 feel like I'm playing Dark Souls, but with Gears of War controls. Like, it just doesn't really work. I'm having to dodge roll and parry in a game about shooting aliens with an explosive grenade launcher. Space Marine, I think, should be power fantasy type game, and that's not really what Space Marine 2 is. Or you've got the multiplayer of Space Marine 2, which is just like a huge grind fest. And like, I get it, but quite frankly, they made a live service, games as live service type game that shouldn't have been games as service. It shouldn't have been live service. They should have stuck with the Space Marine 2 thing, where some stuff in gameplay is offline and some stuff in gameplay is online, rather than me booting up from the main menu and immediately being met with a notification saying logging into servers. But those are just the games that have come out that are better known, We've got some lesser known ones. I mean, a while ago was DACA Squadron, which is an orc flight simulator, or fighter simulator, fighter combat, I don't know. It's an orc game. You play as orc fighter pilots flying around, blowing shit up. You get to customize your plane. It's really mechanically deep, but it's very short. And this is an instance of what I would really refer to as Games Workshop playing it less safe, which I can respect. But they're playing it less safe, and they're just kind of throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks in this case. DACA Squadron, they're like, hey, you, AA Studio, you make games, right? And AA Studio's like, oh yeah, we make games. Perfect. Here's the 40K franchise. Make a flight simulator game about orcs. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. And so they did that, but it didn't really receive that much marketing. Like myself, I only heard about it from Arch, quote unquote, parentheses, totally not official, Warhammer, on like his side channel. It's not even his main content. He's a Warhammer lore guy, and on his side channel he's like, hey, there's this game where you do orc flying stuff, and I was like, oh, that looks kind of cool, and I bought it. But I never really saw any marketing for it, like, anywhere. I never saw any big name channels cover it. There was no hubbub about it. Or you've got Rogue Trader coming out. Rogue Trader had kind of the same thing. I think they did try to market Rogue Trader a little bit more. It's made by Owlcat, the guys who do the Pathfinder CRPGs, and it's really fun game. It's a great game. Like Rogue Trader, I'd say is easily like a 7-8 out of 10. But the problem with Rogue Trader is it came out at the same time as Baldur's Gate 3, which was a CRPG made by a bigger studio, better known studio, and way more accessible. So it kind of just got drowned out. It got snuffed like that. And that's a shame, because I think Rogue Trader is a great game. It deserves your attention. In fact, if you're watching this right now and you like CRPGs, or maybe you don't like CRPGs, but you like 40K, go to Steam, buy Rogue Trader if you can afford it, and play it. I think it's really fun. I think you'll enjoy it. But so here we come to kind of the problem. A lot of the 40K games that are coming out are... They're sitting more comfortably on like a scale of 1 to 10. They're sitting around like 4, 5, 6 every time. And what that results in is just... It's not a bad game, but it's not a great game. So it just kind of... It dies in obscurity. And I really think that's what we're seeing here is Games Workshop wanting to play it safe on a lot of this stuff. So they're playing it safe with reliable studios, right? Let's say Owlcat or Fat Shark, who they've worked with before. Well, Fat Shark releases a substandard product, so, it's unpopular. They get shit all over. Owlcat releases a stellar product. Unfortunately, they release it during game release season, and then you're just counting on, like, well, our thing is going to be the best, and it's going to be better than anything else, and it's going to be more popular. Well, unfortunately, Owlcat had to go trade blows with with Dungeons and Dragons, an obviously vastly more popular game. You got Space Marine 2. Space Marine 2 is actually doing fairly well for itself, and that's because it came out at the same time as Concord, as Dustborn. Like, yeah, of course Space Marine 2 is going to do well when its competition is... Space Marine 2 is like Usain Bolt competing in the Paralympics. It's just not fair. Or not even Usain Bolt. Space Marine 2 is like me competing in the Paralympics. You know, it's like, yeah, I can outswim these guys. I've got all my limbs. So what we're seeing a lot here is basically, because Games Workshop keeps playing it safe as far as like licensing out 40K, they're not having any great hits, and they become incredibly reliant on luck. You know, their most popular game to come out is Lucky, because it's honestly, hot take, Space Marine 2, kind of fucking mid. But because it comes out next to absolute dumpster fires, everyone's playing it, because it's like, well, what else are you gonna play? Well, there's First Descendant, but got a video coming out on that recently. If you don't want to play First Descendant, you know, you don't want to take a chance on something you don't know, Space Marine 2 is a great option, right? But then when luck doesn't go their way, you've got Rogue Trader, which comes out and gets, you know, snuffed out in the sea of competition because it comes out with good competition. It's going to be really hit or miss. So yeah, those have been my thoughts. It's very rambly, it's very unscripted. Basically sat down and just wrote up some bullet points to guide myself off of while we talk here. Basically, Games Workshop, they want to turn 40K into like a Star Wars-esque franchise, and they're breaking out into that. And the unfortunate, or maybe fortunate, I suppose, depending on how you look at it, reality of that is what happens. You get a lot more misses than you get hits, but when you do get hits, they're pretty good fucking hits. If you haven't already, check out Rogue Trader, give it a play. I'd even recommend DACA Squadron if you're into that sort of thing, if you're into flight simulators. Thank you for dropping by. I stream every day over on Twitch, link in the description. But I stream Tuesday through Friday after work, which for me is 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Love to see you there. New content is on the way. I've got a review of First Descendant that I am working on right now. Got it all scripted out, so I'm going to start recording and editing, and I hope you guys are going to like that. So thanks for tuning in, and have a great day.